to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of the book, The Gift Best Given, a memoir, which is about his biological mother. His name is Edward Di Gangi, and my interview with Edward will follow the teleportation sound. Edward Di Gangi, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Aaron, thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I've listened through several episodes and always appreciate the breadth of topics that you cover and the diverse viewpoints and expertise that you present.
Thank you so much. Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, my name is Edward Di Gangi. I am a retired customer service professional, and I live in Hillsborough, North Carolina. The folks in North Carolina like to consider us as the country's writingest states, and Hillsborough reportedly has the highest percentage of per capita authors of the population of any place else. So we like to think of ourselves as the country's writingest town. I'm 76 years old, as I said, a retired customer service professional. Live here with my wife, Linda. And in my retirement, I began to write.
The book you've written is a memoir titled "The Gift Best Given." Without spoiling too much of your memoir, what is it about?
Yeah, Aaron, thank you. The book is about, to just take a quick step back, I am an adoptee, and I was adopted at the time of my birth back in 1948. And every time I say that, I just have to shake my head, but I was adopted in 1948. You know, adoption is a rather fraught subject. Some folks have had wonderful experiences, as have I. Others have had troublesome experiences, and that's something I learned more about as I wrote my book. But the book ultimately was about the search for the identity of the woman who placed me for adoption back in May of 1948. And until I was about 69 years old, I really never gave it any true thought. And I had one of those triggering moments where I was standing in a cemetery over the gravestone of my adoptive mother's parents. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of go back and research where they came from, what that history was about. And as I began that process, I realized that, it was something that is not as difficult and labor intensive as it used to be. And I said, I bet I could probably find out more about my biological history. And that's what The Gift Best Given is all about. It was about the search for the identity of the woman who placed me for adoption and the secrets or the unexpected surprises that I found during the course of that journey.
Now, this is a question that I don't know how you're going to, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this one, to be honest, but how personally difficult was it for you to write a memoir about your biological mother?
Aaron, I assume you're referring to the to the emotional journey of uncovering the. Yeah, and I apologize for that background noise. I've got a phone ringing here. I approached it really as kind of an academic exercise and divorced of too much emotion. I wasn't sure who or what I would find. I made an assumption back in that era that my mother was probably a teenager who found herself unexpectedly pregnant, revealed herself, and was sent away either to a maternity home or some distant relative, and then returned, without her child, and went on with life. And knowing that was a fairly typical history for many women back then, I was prepared for that and prepared not to be, really emotionally touched by it. But I found a rather different story when I started to search.
What was it like finding out that your biological mother was an ice skating show performer?
Yeah, that was the big surprise. When I went in and I started to dig, I did not find that teenage girl. I found a 23-year-old woman who had become unexpectedly pregnant, but then who returned, and she grew up in New York City or just outside of New York City. She returned and she essentially sequestered herself and managed her pregnancy pretty much secretly, right through the point of placing me for adoption. And it was a total surprise to find out that she had been a celebrity performer back in the era of the 1940s, and then subsequently after my adoption through the middle part of the 1950s.
How long did it take you to do the research for your memoir?
I began my search in the early part, February, I believe, of 2017. I began writing almost immediately, and I began writing with that cemetery event, knowing nothing about my mother, but introducing the fact that I was going on a journey. And the book itself was ultimately published in May of 2020, right into the teeth of the COVID epidemic. So it was about a 3-year process, 3.5 years.
What is the easiest and hardest part of the book writing process for you?
Well, I guess the hardest part for me is, it is just the discipline of sitting down every day and getting words on a page. The easiest part and the part that I loved the best was the research. I loved digging in and uncovering the story, and during the course of the journey, met so many kind and generous people who were able to provide me with help, not only about my mother's story, but about the publishing and authoring process. And I went out and I sought that help, and people were very, very responsive. The difficult part, though, is just, I think, the sheer discipline of sitting down and saying writing a book is work.
Is your memoir, The Gift Best Given, is that self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid published?
It is a self-published book. I knew little about publishing when I embarked on writing the book, and I felt it was an excellent book, and I still feel it's an excellent book. I pursued traditional publishing very briefly. I queried a number of agents, got some response, but the more I researched, the more I realized that coming to terms with an agent is not a fast process. They're finding a publisher is even a slower process. And should they find a publisher, going to print is another process that takes a couple of years. And as I said, I was 69 at the time I started writing, so I was 72 when the book came out. And I said, life is too short to wait for all of this. So I did look at a couple of hybrid publishers, and knowing or having learned what I learned about self-publishing, I said I could do the same thing for my book myself at a far lower cost than I could through a hybrid publisher. So I pursued self-publishing.
Your memoir, The Gift Best Given, was published in May of 2020, which was around the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns. What was it like to have a book published during the COVID shutdown?
Well, I got a lot of advice of, why don't you just wait till September when this is all over? And there was just something in my mind that said, September may not be when this is all over. And certainly that was not the case. So I just plodded fearlessly ahead. As I said, I have a background in customer service and managing very large groups of people. And I had maintained touch with many of them through social media. So I just started publishing or publicizing my book via social media to begin with, and via a network of friends as a secondary source, and wound up selling a good number of books directly from my website, and a still greater number of books from Amazon and from wider distribution from there. And I just kept on publicizing as I was able. I was not able to go out and and make public appearances. But as soon as that opportunity arose, I did that as well, and found libraries very interested, book clubs interested, and and bookstores interested and supportive.
How many events have you done promoting your memoir, and what is it like to do events promoting your book?
Oh, I love the opportunity to go out in person. There is not one event where I haven't had somebody come up afterwards and kind of furtively look around and say, "Don't tell anybody, but I'm adopted," or "Don't tell anybody, but when I was a young girl, I gave up a child for adoption." I've just met a huge number of very open, very friendly, very interested, and receptive people out there. Boy, I can't tell you a specific number. If anybody's interested in the numbers themselves, I do have an events tab on my website, and every one of them is recorded there. This coming, I think 2 or 3 weeks from now, November 9th, I'll be in Augusta, Georgia, at the public library down there. Right after the first of the year, another book club event. So I still love those opportunities to go out and mix with the readers and just interact with them.
On your website, you have 3 events as of now promoting your memoir scheduled during 2025. All of them are in North Carolina, in Greensburg, Burlington, and Raleigh. Can you tell us more about those events?
Well, sure. The one in Greensboro is an author fair at the Central Library for the Greensboro Public Libraries. I'll be delivering a memoir workshop there, as well as signing books and talking with readers. The one which I believe is the first weekend in March is a book club event at an independent bookstore in Burlington, North Carolina. And then in October of 2025, I'll be talking with the Wonderland Book Club at Quail Ridge Books in Raleigh, which is one of the area's just greatest bookstores. It's a wonderful place. And at that book store, I will be talking about my forthcoming book, which is actually a sequel to The Gift Best Given. And that book currently is a working title, Gliding Through Goodbye.
I have a couple questions left in this interview. The first of my last couple of questions. What is your best advice to anyone who is middle-aged or older and is considering writing a book for the first time?
It's probably an oversimplification. I would just say, sit down, start writing. If you think you have a story in you, and I believe that every one of us has at least one story in us, start down, make some notes and jot some thoughts down. Books have beginnings, they have middles, and they have ends. If nothing else, start to make those notes about, how do I start this? Where does it end? And what happens in between? And then just sit down and start writing. I think one of the very good things I did is I got involved with a couple of library groups. One was a memoir group that met once a month, and we would just sit down and write about pieces of our life. The other was, again, another monthly group at a different library, which basically people just brought anything they were thinking about writing. So my contributions were always whatever I was working on from The Gift Best Given at that point. And you learn a number of things. One is you learn from people who write better than you and have more experience than you do. But the other part is exposing yourself to the fact that there are many people who you write as well as, or perhaps you write better than. So there's encouragement in the fact that you're not at the bottom of that pile. And if you are, so what? You learn from those around you and you get better as time passes. So I would go out and I would find a group. I'm currently a member of a group right now, and we meet every couple of weeks. And it's it also gives you the discipline of feeling that I need to have something in hand ready to read a week from now. And it makes you sit down and write.
My final question for this interview, if you could meet your biological mother in person, what would be the first thing you would say to her? And I'm asking this question with the understanding that your biological mother is deceased.
That's correct. I found out in the course of my research that I started in 2017. She had passed away in 2014, which I regret, but I believe things happen for a reason. And, I would like to have had the opportunity to meet her, but that just, it didn't happen. Writing the book gave me a profound appreciation for what a woman goes through in relinquishing a child for adoption, from the point of making that decision to physically, parting with that child, and then all of the time afterwards. I don't think I thought originally, well, gee, this is a one and done. It happens and it's over. It's a lifelong event for a birth mother. I was placed into the hands of a very, very wonderful couple. I had an ideal life. And if I had one thing to say to my mother, is thank you. And this worked out better than you could have ever imagined.
Edward, you were an amazing guest for this podcast, and I thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk to you. As I said, I've listened to the show before. I always enjoyed the episodes, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to chat.
It was wonderful to learn about the life story of Edward's biological mother. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.